taxes. Once you're done, you'll click on Save and Close, Continue. Of course, you'd want to make sure there's a class in there. If there was a class, it should have been probably Admin or Overhead. Okay, and then go ahead and create the paychecks. And that concludes the advanced payroll setup. The next feature we're going to talk about is workers' compensation. To start with the workers' compensation, we need to start with the preferences. In QuickBooks, you'll click on Edit, and then go to Preferences. Under Payroll and Employees, we'll click on the Company Preferences tab, where we're going to find workers' compensation. When you click on workers' compensation, you want to make sure that you can track workers' compensation, and you want to maybe exclude overtime premium work hours from calculation. Click on OK, and then we'll click on OK again. The second place we need to verify that it's set up correctly is under the item list. We're going to go under Employees, go back down to Manage Payroll Items, and then click on Edit View Payroll Item List. In there, we now will find a workers' compensation payroll item that we need to make sure is set up correctly. This was set up in here, so let me go through that with you. We're going to edit it. Double-click on your workers' compensation, and it typically is called workers' compensation, although if you want to abbreviate it, you can as well. This is a case where we do want to track it by job. We also want to indicate who our workers' comp insurance company is, the policy number that they give you, and then you also want to make sure that your liability account and your expense account are correct. The default is going to be just your payroll liabilities for your liability account, and the default will be your payroll expenses for your expense account. I have made an additional chart of account called workers' compensation that is part of my liabilities under the payroll liabilities, and likewise for the expense, I have under insurance, I have a work comp. Typically in a job type setting for QuickBooks, it does have this account, but you can always add it if it doesn't. Then you'll click on Finish. That's just making sure that it's going to be going into the right liability and correct expense account. Now we're going to go into the actual workers' comp to do the final setup. Under Employees, we want to go down to Workers' Compensation, and we want to manually track existing workers' comp policy. There is a workers' comp payment service, which I believe is still run by Hartford, although for construction, from what my customers have told me, that anybody in the contractor type business, they're no longer writing policies for. It was a nice service because for me, we do use it, and it's a pay-as-you-go, and on top of that, they have a link that connects to QuickBooks, and it detects once a payroll is submitted, it will draw that payroll figures, and it'll tell you what it's going to be deducting from your account. It's nice and easy for a lot of companies, but again, in the contractor field, in any contractor type situation, they're not writing policies anymore. So we're going to set up and track an existing work comp policy. We'll click on, it tells you what you're going to need. We're going to click on Next. You indicate who your policy is written through, the policy number, and your policy date. We're going to say that this is on 10/1/2013 is what our new policy is. Oh, and by the way, as far as I'm in knowledge of, if you have, unless you're a construction company, if you have 4 or more employees, you're required to have workers' comp. If you have a construction company, you are required from employee number 1. Although I would recommend having it even if you have 1 employee, because remember, if there's an incident and the employee's on work hours, it'd be your personal liability. So workers' comp policies, unless you're in the construction industry, are fairly inexpensive. I'd recommend getting one. Click on Next. Now you have your employees listed here. These are your active employees, and we're going to add, maybe Denise is an exempt owner, so Denise would be exempt. Dan Miller is a concrete and cement worker, and so is Greg. Also, what's important to know is, let's say you have a salesperson that goes on the road 1 day a week and you have them in the office 4 days a week. Well, the office and salesperson on the road versus an office worker, there's a big difference. But with the policies, when they write them, you have to indicate what, if they do it part of the time, they're charged for the full time. You can't say, well, they're in the office part of the time, so I'll charge a code for part of their office time and then part on the sales code. It doesn't work that way. You have to charge the higher code. But you do want to make sure your employees are coded correctly to the work that they're doing. Once you're done coding them, you'll click on Next. And if you have an experienced mod factor, which is a discount, you can enter your mod factor here and when it went into effect. If you don't have an experienced mod factor, you would indicate that you do not. Do you pay overtime wages? Yes, you do pay overtime wages. And do you want to exclude them from premium, which is, again, one of the preferences? We'll say no. We'll keep it workers' compensation, and we can click on Finish. So it's just going to give you, I had not said no, so it's going to pull up the Help menu. Now I want to show you in the employee where it shows up, and also in their timesheets and in their pay. So if we click on Employees, if we go to Greg Miller, we can go to the Payroll Setup. Not under the Payroll Setup. Sorry, where is it? Oh, sorry, Workers' Compensation. And the Workers' Comp code is right here, so that's tracked by your employee. It's a nice new tab that they have in the 2014. They may have added in 2013, but 2014 definitely has it as a separate tab. The next place we can see that is in the timesheet. So when you click on the timesheet and choose Dan Miller, Dan Miller, you can see now that there's a work comp code. So you make sure that that's completed in, and it should, once you, of course it's giving me a warning they've been paid, but once you've selected it to be in his employee record, your next timesheet, it should automatically pull in. And then also when you pay employees, it's also now part of, if I do an unscheduled payroll, it wasn't a part of his timesheet. Oops, I didn't want to do that. It wasn't part of his timesheet, but you'll see that there's going to be another column for it. And I have already run a payroll with it in there, so I'll go back and show you that payroll under Dan, which I believe it was this one. Let's see, nope. Let's see if I can find it quickly here. It's one of these. No, oh, maybe it wasn't him. Let's see. There we go. So I had hourly, and I had the amount that he's paid times the rate. So it gave me a work comp code in there, which is calculating the rate behind the scenes. And the rate was determined when I set up a work comp code. Let me go back to that under employees, workers comp. So work comp list. I have these codes here under the work comp list, and I had set that one up. So if we want to set up a new one, maybe it's 8810, and this is clerical. And I can't remember what the rate is. We're just going to throw in, I don't know, 0.085, 0.85, I think. It's something really small. We'll start using that on the first as well. So this would be an example of a clerical. And of course, your rates would come from your insurance carrier. All right, we're going to go back into, actually, what I want to show you last is how you actually pay it. Now you're going to have to do some kind of either a weekly audit, a pay period audit, or a monthly audit. Most workers' comp policies require you to do some kind of self-audit so that you can make that payment, so you know how much to actually pay. Under employees, we're going to go back to workers' compensation, and you can pull up a work comp summary. This work comp summary, given the period that you're going to run it for, you make sure that it's in the right period. You can see, of course, normally you wouldn't have a no work code, but you can see under the 5221, there's the wages that I paid. I can always double click and see that that was the Dan Miller. You can see the premium that's due at the current rate, and it's the mod factor was 100% versus like 95% or 90, and you can see how much I owe them. So given that $15.30, I would print this report out and keep it with your payment and with your policy, so when you do your annual audit, you'll have that available. And then we can go into the chart of accounts and look down at our liabilities, and we can see under workers' compensation that it has accrued $15.30. Now to pay that, we can simply go into either write checks or go into the register, depending on how you're actually going to be paying for that. If we go into the write checks, we can write a check for Hartford Insurance for $15.30. We want to make sure that we pay it against the workers' comp policy for $15.30. If you have it set up, we'll do to be printed. If you have it set up as a liability to be paid under your employee setup, under your payroll